Well, good morning, everybody. As we start today off, we're looking here at a map of temperatures around 7 o'clock this morning, about 7:20 this morning, Central Time, where we're kind of seeing the full extent of some of the Arctic air we talked about coming through the United States this week. Kind of the coldest spot as I look here throughout much of the Central Plains, I'm looking like maybe from Rapid City over to parts of central Wyoming. This is where we seem to have the coldest air anchored, but one of the big pieces of this forecast is how long this is going to last. And I'm just going to show you something here. Coming into kind of our multi-model forecast using the European model, the GFS, and the national blend, we're seeing these really cold temperatures kind of reaching a bottom tomorrow morning, and look at the moderation in temperatures that are expected by the time we get toward the end of this week. That's going to be an important component of this upcoming forecast. But one of the things that the models underestimated was how far to the south this cold air was going to make it. And it extended, quite a bit farther into Texas as anticipated. And why that's critical is this is going to be an area where this shallow Arctic air mass is going to set up the potential for a freezing rain event this week. Now we can see how far that cold air has made it by looking at the temperature change over the last 24 hours. So again, this just compares the temperature now, this morning, to what it was 24 hours ago. And you can see we have some places down here 30 to 35 degrees colder than it was this time yesterday. Well, here's the flow setup we're going to watch all week. This is our retracted jet. This is where it splits, and then it comes back together where there's a large subtropical ridge here, and then there is flow coming around a deeper Hudson Trough there. Now, just in general, whenever you see this type of flow, this split across the west, this is a drier pattern for most of the United States, all right? It's also got some colder air in it. But this subtropical ridge is going to fuel and kind of reinvigorate this subtropical component of the jet, which in tonight's in-depth forecast we're going to have a lot of discussion about. That's going to be critical for the rest of February's forecast. But as it stands, what this is doing in the near term is getting us set up for the potential for a pretty substantial winter storm event that's going to come out of Texas in multiple rounds this week. So winter storm warnings are out, large area of winter weather advisories, and an ice storm warning out for parts of Arkansas, northern Mississippi, into western Tennessee. Behind this is all wind chill warning, wind chill advisory. And we got some very strong winds in the Sacramento Valley expected today with a frost the risk of a freeze in parts of the San Joaquin Valley here, the northern edges of it. So our setup here is quite, I guess I would call it dynamic to start the week, but watch as this pattern evolves and this cold air starts to move off very, very soon. Now, interesting thing to note here, I pulled a forecast sounding from one of my favorite websites, pivotalweather.com, looking at the middle of Texas, right there in central Texas. I'm supposed to be in San Angelo on Wednesday, so we'll see if this ice storm gets us, but this is the forecast temperature profile. Now, you see this blue line right here. That one represents the 0-degree isotherm, which means this here is a large temperature inversion. See it? Very warm air aloft, subfreezing air at the surface. What that leads to is the risk of having ice. So here we go. Remember, on these animations, blue is snow, pink, like that dark shade of pink is ice, and then the green to sometimes even a deep green would be heavy rain. So as we play this through the day today, you can see this this area of overrunning because of the ridge to the north, the flow coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. So the flow's coming around like this, and then around like that, and you get this sandwiching effect where the surface subfreezing layer is deep, but the upper level warm layer is also enough to allow the snow to melt, giving you the ice. So as we play this forward, this is going through the day on Tuesday, playing now into Tuesday night, getting into Wednesday. You can see the setup here. And that's why the Weather Prediction Center has got this large area out from Texas and Oklahoma, Arkansas, and western Tennessee as having the greatest risk of picking up at least 1/10 of an inch of ice. You get up to 1/4 inch, and we're talking about potentially a lot of damage. And you can see here is where the risk of at least 1/4 of an inch of ice accumulation. And we're going to step this up one last time to 0.5. And that's where I pulled that sounding from right here, which just shows you the greatest risk of the most significant ice accumulations. Okay, with that being the front part of this, the next part of this is to discuss where the heaviest rains are going to be. And the latest WPC forecast suggests that from eastern Texas through Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, getting to Georgia and through the Carolinas, there's going to be a region in through here that picks up a lot of rain. Outside of that, this pattern is dry. I mean, you can see much of the rest of the Canadian Prairie, central United States, even through New England, the Corn Belt through New England, drier. And the split flow in the west means limited chances of bringing in heavier precipitation across the west. So let's go have a look at it by looking at today's European model run. This is the 0Z operational run. We've seen through the ice storm event through Wednesday. Let's now let the model pick this up midday Wednesday where the NAM left off. So this is going Wednesday midday, Wednesday evening, and playing forward. You just continue to see, okay, there's a little bit of snow showers coming through the Canadian Prairie, Ontario, Quebec, a little bit of lake effect snow, but most of the heavy rain is to the south. This is through Friday morning. We will see a front come into the west on Friday midday into Friday evening, but this is not the same type of onshore flow event we saw in early January. After that, this weekend, not a whole lot going on. We're just going to keep an eye on a coastal storm system here this upcoming Saturday night and Sunday morning that could finally get on shore. But outside of that, much of the rest of the United States, it goes over to a relatively drier pattern. We will keep our eye on this system coming into the west this weekend into early next week, as it could eject somewhere in the plains. I'm just rocking back and forth over Monday and Tuesday. But at that time, I expect quite a bit of mild air to be back in place. So we're going to have to question how far to the north we have to go to see some snow out of this. We'll take a look at it in a second here. Next, this is the chance of getting at least an inch of rain over the next 10 days. And here's the chance of picking up at least 2 inches. So very heavy rain across those areas we just discussed. But as I mentioned, not a whole lot of snow in this forecast. There's some of the snow through the northern part of the Canadian Prairie, the lake effect here, then getting into eastern Ontario and Quebec. But outside of that, even the mountains out west are not picking up too much snow out of this particular pattern. The lack of snow cover here in the northeast is something I want to keep a close eye on as well. There's some in the interior, but it's not made its way very far, like toward the I-95 corridor. And why that's important is where this cold air is going. So here's Monday's high temperatures. That's today, of course. You can see the influence of the southeastern ridge, keeping it very mild here. But the cold air advances on Tuesday and into Wednesday, starts to push into the east, finally get some cold air into the Carolinas and Virginia. But this will be, again, the setup for that ice event down here in Texas through Wednesday. So it's going to be a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday setup here. Now going into Thursday, watch this. Thursday into Friday, the first time in a very long time, we're going to see some very cold air into the interior of New York. And without the insulating snowpack on the ground, we just need to be careful of seeing such a dramatic change in the temperatures here. But watch this. This is Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Mild air returns. And the latest longer range forecast, this was a pretty big shift from the weekend model trends. Watch what happens once we look here fully at the end of the first week of February through Valentine's Day. Very mild forecast showing up. And the models want to reinforce that subtropical ridge again. And there's a lot of good evidence for that. And they show this for the long-range forecast for mid-February to late February. Much of the west keeps a cooler bias. A lot of this anchored in the Intermountain West, not necessarily along the coast. But the forecast is quite mild here for much of the east. Now, again, this is all dependent on maintaining that subtropical ridge, which we're going to talk about tonight in our in-depth report. But that would keep much of the Mid-South, Ohio Valley, Mississippi Valley into New England, including, of course, the Tennessee Valley, quite wet, and return possibly better snows to the Pacific Northwest, which they need to see return. And the important part about this for this area is kind of rebuilding some of the deeper issues we have in the soil with respect to soil moisture, which we're going to keep an eye on here, and also what this might mean for setting up kind of our soil moisture for spring planting. Still concerned about the drought maintaining itself on the western side of this. Okay, to wrap this up, I want to show you, we have an in-depth discussion in today's report about how La Nina continues to fade, and we're going to look at a couple of different areas for that. But we do spend the very end of this report talking about the heavy rains that were seen since mid-January in Argentina. Okay, you can just kind of take a look at this from January 16th to the 29th. The flooding rains that have continued here in the north, slowing harvest in Mato Grosso. But as we look forward in this forecast, we're going drier here. Harvest progress will pick up. Very wet in central Brazil, Paraguay. This is going to continue to push beans to stay green longer, and this area is slowing harvest. Some of the biggest model trends I think that are most important is Argentina, even after all that rain, is now showing a very, very dry signal here, including parts of like Rio Grande do Sul and Uruguay. And during this 15-day window, we do expect the temperatures to really crank up again. It's like midsummer heat here. So there was some relief from the drought, and now things seem to be back on for hot, dry conditions, which could further stress the crops in Argentina. So we got a lot to be watching this week. I'll give you an in-depth report tonight, and we'll talk again very soon. Thanks.